certainly, how do we bring down the system? But how do we keep midwifery what it is? How do we stay true to safe care? Hi, my name is Augustine Colebrook, and I'm the principal at Midwifery Wisdom Collective. I speak on this podcast about big picture political issues and the future of our profession.
Hey y'all, I am Jamara, and I'm a midwife. I'm also a birth justice activist, and this season I am looking forward to sharing stories of Black midwives and the communities they serve.
Hello, beloved birth community. I'm Angela Love, nurse midwife since 2004, preceptor, and mother. I have a home birth practice called Midwife Love and a national telehealth practice called Midwife RX. My mission is to keep birth choices available and to educate the next generation of midwives for our daughters and grandchildren. Matriarchy now.
I'm Layla Wyatt. I get to share with you the voices of student midwives from across the country and beyond. This season, we focus on those students who just graduated, are about to sit for the NARM, or did yesterday, and we get tips and tricks for you for what happens at the end of the student midwife journey.
Welcome to the Midwifery Wisdom Podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you. You have such a diverse background. Like, where do we even start?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Yes, I'm excited to talk to you too. I love your podcast, and I'm still yet to really figure out how it works though in the US. Like, I don't get it. There's so many different kinds of midwives. I don't really get how that works. Do you get how that
you're
works?
Not alone. There's lots of people in the US who don't get it. But you are not in the US. So I think maybe that's the place to start. So why don't we start with where you are currently, where you came from, and kind of like what your mission is. What are you doing right now?
All right, cool. Yeah. So I'm originally Swedish, and I am currently in Sweden, but I spent before this year. So I returned to Sweden actually, it's really funny. I left last year exactly on this day from Australia.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Oh, wow.
My friend just reminded me this morning. Yeah. So I spent, what was it? 7 or 8 years in Australia. I have been on and off in Australia since I was 21. I'm 35 now. And so it's been my second home for a long time, but I was there straight for those 7-8 years. And that's where I decided to become a midwife as well, and did my training and worked and started my own business and everything as well. So, but yes,
and what side of the country were you on? Were you an East Coaster or a West Coaster?
Yeah, I've been both. Hey, so for the last 7 to 8 years, I was on the East Coast. I was mainly in Byron Bay, which is a very special place. Do you know
very
it?
Special.
Okay,
I do. And do you know Tanny Paxton?
No, I don't. Tanny Paxton.
She practices in that area as well. She's an independent midwife.
Oh, I know a lot of midwives in that area, though. In Byron Shire, is she, or just on the East Coast?
No. I think she's in the northern East Coast, but I don't know exactly what town she's in. Anyway, amazing midwife as well. So cool.
Beautiful. I'd love to connect with her. I love connecting with midwives.
Yeah, me too.
My mission, yes.
Here we are.
I know, right? I do believe it's so important that we come together, and also just birth workers, right? Not just midwives either, but like just birth workers who hold space for birth. And for us, because again, so in Byron Shire, where I was at, it's quite an alternative area. It's in the middle of the East Coast. And so, and I have been in the north as well. I was working as a midwife up in Early Beach in the Whitsundays, where the Barrier Reef is, or it's but it's quite famous for where the reef is. Anyway, back to my story. So the Byron Shire is quite alternative. It's actually around 25% of women have home births there, and there's a birth center there, and almost the rest of the area has birth center births, and only a few go to the hospitals nearby, right?
Yeah.
Which is very that's not common in Australia. It's not common.
No,
You
not
know,
at
as
all.
you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was very blessed. And that's one of the reasons I did decide to become a midwife when I ended up living there, because of that reason. I could walk alongside home birth midwives for my training. I was in the birth center for most of my practice. And that's the way I wanted to practice. I never ever wanted to be in the hospital. And I couldn't stand, to be honest, to be a midwife in the hospital. I've never liked hospitals. It's just who I am. So I'm a home birth kind of gal, and I do appreciate birth center births, but like if I can choose, it's definitely in the home. That's where I love to be.
I love that. And now you've gone back to Sweden. Tell me a little more about like what brought you back, and what are you hoping to accomplish with midwifery now that you're back?
Yeah, so that was a curveball. Like most of the world, you know, with the pandemic, it just became so clear that I was way too far away from my blood family, like my mother, my father, you know, they get older. You know, just things happening in my family back home here that I just felt when I was stuck in Australia, because Australia was very, very, very hard in their.
Did you know I was struck in Australia during the pandemic?
No.
Yeah. I was stuck in Perth.
Oh, goodness me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was in Timor-Leste, a small Pacific island north of Australia, helping to try to establish a new clinic there. I had been in Papua, and I couldn't go back to Papua when the pandemic hit, because that's even more rustic. You know, you have to have a guard at all times. And I couldn't get back into Indonesia, in Bali, where I had friends and colleagues. I couldn't go on to Thailand, where I was intending to go, because it was like 3 months before I was supposed to be there. I don't have a home in the US. And so I was like, well, if the shit hits the fan, you have to be able to speak the language. So Australia is the nearest English speaking language country. I guess I better just hop a plane to Australia. I'll sit it out for a month. You know, that was my idea.
God.
Yeah, no. Then I was the last plane to land before they closed the borders.
Lucky.
6 hours before they closed the borders. And then they were closed, like hard closed. Like nobody seems to understand how crazy it was. Like
crazy.
Not only could people not get in, but you couldn't leave. There were like legitimately 0 flights. You couldn't go anywhere. And I was there for 6 months. So I know exactly what that lockdown was like.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I mean, and now I'm so curious. Like, what did you do for 6 months in Perth? I mean, I lived there for a while, but that was in my early 20s in Fremantle. So you would know Fremantle.
Oh, I know exactly where Fremont. It's amazing. I spent a lot of time walking the beach near Fremantle. Yeah, no, it was really hairy in the beginning, because I landed with this idea of like, I'll meet up with this one friend I knew on the entire continent. And he jumped a plane to Thailand the day I landed without telling me, like a little bit, not really mentally there. But anyway, I had an Airbnb and I stayed there. And then my 7 days came up, you know, because I had just rented a week's worth, and they wouldn't extend because I was a foreigner. And then, so I kept booking with other Airbnbs, and then they would cancel because the system would automatically let you book. And then the person would say no. And Airbnb takes like 7 or 8 days to get your funds back. So I ended up going through thousands of dollars trying to find a place to stay, and then ended up not with any place to stay. So I actually slept at the beach for 2 nights before I could find it was so crazy. Like there are moments where I really felt like I was like on the edge of the earth, because, you know, I was 10,000 miles from anyone I knew, and had no place, like literally no place to stay. I don't know, like the fear took over, you know, like people wouldn't even really engage in conversation. Like they were just panicked, thanks to the media mongering. And so one of the Airbnb ladies messaged me, and she was like, I don't know what to say. Like 7 people have booked the same room, but you can stay like on the patio if you want. And I was like, okay. So I like randomly got to sleep in this lady's like space, like her back patio, covered patio. She like brought me blankets, and she like did the whole social distance. She like left them out there and like told me how to get, it was and this is like complete stranger. And so while I was there using her Wi-Fi, because of course I didn't have an Australian SIM, you know, I was just like, I was completely abandoned, like totally stranded. And I messaged like my Facebook community, like, I'm in Perth. Does anyone know anyone in Perth? Like, I need help. And a friend in Connecticut knew a friend in New York who knew someone in California, who knew someone in Melbourne, knew someone in like, and it just trickled down till this lady knew somebody who she was going to school with, who was going to go stay with her family and had a house that she needed house sitting. And then the ex-sister-in-law, cousin, somebody from an old school friend in high school found a second car I could use. And so within a matter of a very short few days, it was a chaotic few days, I had like a house and a car and a cat and a circle of friends. But it like just happened. Like, it was so crazy. So I ended up finding out. So the lady who's was like the house, or like the schoolmate of a friend of a friend of a friend, she was going out of town to be with her family. And she was like, just so that you're safe, I'm going to give you the name and number of the landlord in case you need anything, because I'm a renter. And I was like, okay, great. So she gives me the name of the landlord. And the email she wrote down was The Art of Birth. And my email is Art of Birthing. And I was like, wow. Wait, is this correct? And she was like, yeah, that's Narafia. I don't know if you know Naf, but she's a home birth midwife in Perth. So I ended up staying in the house owned by a home birth midwife by complete accident. we ended up becoming really, really good friends and hung out really kind of constantly. And then I ended up started teaching workshops while I was there for midwives and holding women's gatherings. And like, it became I got this whole community, but initially it was really crazy. So yeah, I know what Australia's lockdown was like. It was psycho. And yeah. I mean, no offense to any of the Australians out there, but Australian government was, I know they just elected a new PM, but was incredibly big brother. Like, we have surveillance cameras and like trackings of humans, and it's very scary, very scary. Not the kind of world I want to live in. Yeah. But let's go back to you, because I hijacked that story. Sorry.
I love that though. I mean, yes, I mean, it was crazy. I was very fortunate because I was in Byron, and Byron didn't really buy into the fear mongering. I mean, it's an old hippie kind of colony.
Yeah, I've heard it.
Like, so it's like all these artists and alternative people and very kind of, self-sustained group of people. So the community, most of them, we were kind of all isolated for about a month, the first month, before we knew what this was, and then we wasn't really, because there weren't, and also like there weren't a lot of COVID around. So yeah, I did have most of that year. I was even traveling between states to Queensland when they opened the borders and stuff, and so I wasn't much touched about for the whole time. I was very lucky. But I know that if you were in a big city like Perth, Sydney, or Melbourne, you did not have a fun 2 years. You were really, really struggling inside lockdown.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yes. We're not here to talk about COVID. Oh my God.
No.
It's funny though how you always get back to that conversation, because it's just so much in our collective consciousness, isn't it? Like, there's a trauma there for us.
It changed everything. It changed everything. Yeah.
It did.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me,
I think for those of us that were like in such different environments, like, I mean, and this is, I mean, we're going off topic again, but this is part of like, I think the bigger global conversation we need to have about the pandemic is that, again, it was entirely centering a certain type of the population and discounting the rest of the population. Like all of these orders, like stay home, that only works if you have a home to stay in.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was homeless by choice. Which is very different than being homeless without having that independence and autonomy. But like, I got to experience firsthand, in a very small way, the real devastation that was a part of the homeless population, the less fortunate, the low resourced. and they're still suffering. And I think they suffer disproportionately. And I think that's just not been a part of the global conversation.
Or all the mental health, or all the spike in suicide, or just
exactly
a horrible experience for women birthing in hospitals. Or, I mean, we can go on, like.
Yeah, it was really devastating.
Yeah.
And I think the evidence is still coming out about whether the lockdown measures were more damaging than the actual
I'm pretty sure it was,
disease.
for sure.
And I think it deserves the question. It deserves the conversation. But it was a particularly disorienting time for people like you and I, who were not at home. Like there was, like, I had built a community, you had a community, but there's something so disorienting about the pandemic in general, but then about being completely displaced during the pandemic, that I think it's hard to verbalize. And so, like, any chance we do get these moments to like connect, I think it pops up, it bubbles up, because
it does. And it's going to take a long time for us to process this. And we don't really have the chance, because it's just escalating in the world with different new things, doesn't it, all the time? So it's like we don't even have time to process what just happened. And media's really good at that too, isn't it, to divide us and all that.
Well, and
so that's why I love these
the definition of compound trauma, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what compound trauma is that it just stacks. So these conversations help us unpack it. Yeah,
definitely. And like just coming together, understanding that we're all one, like we're all human beings. We all share the same core, in a sense of like just wanting to be loved, to be safe, to be sovereign in our decision making, to be free. Like those are the human values that we all have, whoever we are in the world. And when we realize that we're more alike than not, then maybe we can talk about these hard things that are currently going on in the world, that we just don't seem to see eye to eye on. And why can't we just all sit down and have a conversation?
The open-mindedness, the discourse, the willing to hear other opinions. I think that's the format. Well, so tell me, you were in Byron Bay. It was fairly protected, but something made you come home. Tell me more about what made you come back.
Well, I guess, first of all, I had a very strong intuition telling me that I should April 2021. So, I'd been almost a year then, hadn't it? Yeah, of COVID. And at that point, we didn't know when the borders were going to open, like for travel. And I mean, the government, as mentioned, was getting scary. The discourse was getting scary to me. There's a lot of things that were scary, and it had been scary for over a year. I knew already in August 2020 that, like, oh my God, this is scary what they're doing down in Melbourne and Sydney, how they're treating the people. It was just a lot of scary stuff going on with the military and police.
Oh, the videos that came out of like abducting people was so extreme.
Oh, it was so extreme. And, kind of the COVID camps they were building them all over the shop. And anyway, it was just a bit of, scary seeing it from that lens of going like, this is government abuse. Like, this is not okay. And I mean, yes, as you said, I have built my life there. I had a thriving community, business, beautiful friends and community. And I loved Australia. I love Australia very much. It's my second home for sure. And I'll be returning for sure. But then also things happen in my own family back home and here. And I just felt like I needed to make a choice, but I also got a very strong intuition. So actually I got this very strong intuition already in 2019 that I wanted to leave the hospital system. So I did. I also felt that I needed to go rural. I needed to go bush, and I needed to grow my own food, be self-sufficient. I didn't know why. I just had this really strong, and I was like in an apartment having a beautiful view over the ocean. I was working, 80% in the hospital, was not living rural. And I was like, but that had a strong, anyway. So I just literally, this happens in my life, right? I have these feelings, and then it just happens. So what happened was, and now I'm like backtracking a few years before actually getting to your question, but this is how it happened. So I just had a day at work where I just like, okay, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I just had enough with the system and because how frustrating it is to work in a system that the evidence, what's best care, you are so woman-centered and you're so holistic in your care, and you're in a system that wants you to tick boxes and want to use old school methods, because the thing is that people don't realize, and probably your audience does, but evidence doesn't come into practice for another 30 years. You're in the system doing things that you know is not evidence-based. You do it like, and you're trying to educate women, but it's like too late. They come in labor and you're like, I wish I had, helped you months, years ago to understand your body, your vagina, your amazing womb, how birth works. Not, you come in, so many of them afraid and just want you to save them, and you just wish you had more time. So anyway, I had enough with my boss, I had enough with the system, and I just literally just went, I'm resigning today. And I had 2 weeks notice. And there I was like, okay, what do I do now? Because I knew I wanted to work with home birth, but also I wanted to educate. So I started the Spiritual Midwife, which is what I do today. And I started doing online courses. And see, I'm not a techie person. And I had said literally to my best friend who was doing a bit of online stuff, literally probably 2 months before, I could never do that. That scares me. I'm quite, I carry a bit of the witch wound of like, I'm a bit afraid of getting seen, of being heard, of speaking up, of using my voice in a really big public forum. I was like, oh God, that scares the shit out of me. And what I did was literally the next week create the natural birth course. And there I went, creating
awesome.
an online business. So that just happened by itself. And then literally COVID happened, and then all I could do was be online, really. Yeah. I mean, I did continue attending home births. But yeah, because I'm also a women's work facilitator. Like, so for the last 10, 15 years, I'm a yoga teacher, a coach, and a mentor, and a women's work facilitator. So I've spent most of the years before becoming a midwife and during those years as well, and now holding women's circles, holding retreats and workshop spaces for women in claiming, their feminine essence, their understanding about their sexuality, about their blood, blood rights, reclaiming our cycle and understanding how we can live with a cycle. So I'm very passionate about everything woman, really. So birth was just an extension of that. Pregnancy, birth, and beyond was an extension of what I already was doing and was very passionate about. For me, I've always been very political ever since I was a little kid. I was studying human rights before that in uni when I was younger, and I'm very passionate about women's rights and women claiming their place in the world, really. So all I do is from that lens of like, how can we empower each other? How can we stop playing small? And I feel like birth, and I've watched this, and I know you know what I mean, like watching a woman, especially in physiological natural birth space, like the magic that happens in that space, her hormones, like we all get high from the oxytocin in the room. It's just this powerful, palpable experience, and her eyes are glowing, and a lot of them that I've witnessed are going like instantly, I want to do this again, I have to do this again, oh my God, this was amazing. And and most women, because I also have a podcast, and I would love to have you on one day, that's called the Natural Birth Podcast, where I interview women from around the world about their natural, physiological, empowering, positive natural birth stories. And most of them will say like, I knew that after I did this, I can do anything. And we need those women in the world. We need women who are like fearless, lioness, because when you go through birth, you become one. And I would say, even if you do have a traumatic experience, or you weren't having that physiological birth, or you weren't having that instantaneous feeling of empowerment, trauma can bring us there too. Working through our darkness, working through things that happened to us or through us, whether that was chosen or not, we can switch that. I do that too. I work with women a lot with healing birth trauma. How can I see, like, who did I become through that trauma? Because when we go through our depths, whatever that is in life, we can access something much deeper within us, both for ourselves, but also for our world, because we can then hold space for that in others. And that is power. And I think that whether you had, a positive, empowering experience or not, you can turn it into that. It's how how we can reframe things in our mind, how we can also pick out the gems and pearls of wisdoms from that experience that make it empowering, and we can turn it around for sure.
Yeah, it's the ultimate hero's journey. Yeah, I don't know if you studied Joseph Campbell's work, but
I know of it. I haven't studied it in depth, but I know, yes.
Yeah, it's a framework for this archetypal journey, you know, this birthing of ourselves through the process. And you're right. I think adversity almost can teach more. Yes. Adversity can transform more. And I think this is maybe a shadow side of birth that we don't talk about very much. And I agree with you entirely. I think the normal physiologic birth experience is in itself entirely transformative. The hormones, the process, the shifting of all the parts of our being to let a new human through is transformative, 100%. And for everyone that witnesses it. And that is, you know, why it's a rite of passage. It's a magical experience. But I agree with you. I think that preparing for birth, we do people a disservice when we don't help them prepare for any possibility, which could include, you know, an unwished for experience, a birth scenario or a birth outcome that we weren't hoping for. I think being prepared for the unexpected, the unwished for, is one of the greatest skills that we can impart. And then of course, how to process it. I agree entirely. Adversity is the great teacher.
Yeah,
for sure.
it is. And it's a part of life, you know, for some women, it's a part of their birth journey. And for some, it's not. It might be in their parenting journey, it might be in their maidenhood or in their
I always say that. I say some part of the process is going to be impossible. That is how it's made. So getting pregnant, staying pregnant, you know, preterm labor, the labor itself, the delivery, the postpartum, the breastfeeding, somewhere in there, you have a hero's journey. Every person does. That's what takes us through the process.
Yes, for sure. And it's so, I think we live in a society where we just want to take a pill for everything and like avoid uncomfortable feelings. And our whole society is like showing us that that's okay and we should do that. Like we should just numb out with TV, with food, with whatever drug you choose, right? And not feel and sit in the uncomfortableness of feeling whatever we're feeling. But that's where the wisdom is. When we dare to do that, and you know, if you've never done that, and sitting in that can be excruciating in the beginning, it might take some time, but when you go through it, you find yourself, like that's where you are. And actually when you land in that, there's this really calm, comfortable, just knowing of like, I'm fine. Like in this moment, I am fine. Every moment, every present moment, I am fine. And things can happen around me. But most of the time, it's not the present that's traumatic or scary or uncomfortable. It's like the past or the future that we keep reliving when we're, you know, not numbing out.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, I feel like we're at that place because there are so few initiated people, if you know what I mean. In traditional societies, there were multiple ways for there to be initiations, but we have like, you know, uninitiated everywhere. And so birth is oftentimes the first time people who choose to birth normally or attempt to birth normally, that's sometimes the very first time they go through any kind of an initiation. And it is completely shocking if you didn't grow up with the mindset that there are trials and tribulations and like, it's not what happens to you, it's how you react to what happens. You know, like if you don't get trained in that method in the very beginning, like, woo, that birth is intense, you know? And so, I think it's like, that's how I really see myself now. I initiate, you know, I facilitate. And I think that to me is a better definition of midwifery for me.
Totally.
And the preparation is a huge part of the process, you know?
Absolutely.
And that's what you're doing now, right? That's the main focus of your work.
That is
too,
my,
right?
Yeah, it's kind of my main focus. I love that. So yeah, I have two online courses that women can take. The natural birth course that really is there to optimize your chances of having a physiological birth, and it really goes into depth with the preparation of long before, like in the early pregnancy or beyond. Like you can even start it earlier, but it's talking a lot about how to rewire the subconscious mind, how to deal with fears, how to really actually dare to face them and talk about them, prepare for them, put strategies in place. Like it works really with the preparation before even talking about like, what is labor and birth and the phases and like how you can optimize that, but like really get to the core where so many women put their head in the sand. A lot of women, especially maybe if you also are in the spiritual community or like attorney, like you don't want to maybe look at your fears because you don't want to manifest them, but you know what I mean though, but like
that's not a thing, but yeah, I know exactly.
But it's really important to talk about it though, and I 100% believe in the power of the mind and like affirmations, visualizations, and how that can really aid you, and I've seen that in the birth space and with women. But I also think that it's really important to talk about their fears and work through them, because otherwise they will show up at the birth altar, and I've seen that many a times, and I think you have too, right? So we need that. We need to speak of them. We need to go like, okay, so I'm scared of this and this, and how can I then put strategies in place? Like, is it common fear? What happens if, one of the most common ones that we know, right, is like pooping in labor, right? Which is you can think it's a silly one, but it's a fear that a lot of women have because we're not used to defecating in public. Like we've taught that from very early on. That's a shameful thing, and it's very like deep into our core. And so like, let's look at that, right? Like first of all, as midwives, if we see a bit of poo, we're like, ooh, yeah, what's going on here, right? So that makes us happy. That's a weird conditioning, but we think that's great. And like, so to know that we very like you might not even notice, like we'll take that away somehow. We'll facilitate that. For us, it's a no-brainer. Like if you vomit, we do a happy dance behind your back. Like we're happy when stuff like that happens that you think is embarrassing. Like, and if we talk about it, we take away the edge. Now this is like a simple fear. There's fears that are kind of scary. Maybe baby can't breathe or bleed or whatever. But whatever, we need to talk about it, because when we do, we take away some of the energy around it, don't we?
Absolutely. In fact, I always say that a fear in the dark only grows bigger. A fear in the light can be seen, can be dissected, So I have always really been a fan of Pam England's birth safari method. I don't know if you heard or read about this.
Yeah, talk about it.
But she recommends
birth
that
safari. I love it.
Yeah, we take all of our pregnant moms on a birth tiger safari. So we look for birth tigers. And the idea is that a birth tiger is like what the ancient pre-human Lucy would have seen if she were laboring in the jungle, right? So this idea that if you even think you see a tiger, your labor will stop so that you can get somewhere safe. That's what the adrenaline, oxytocin workout thing happens. So if you're afraid in labor, you won't have a productive labor because you're not safe. You have to be safe to birth. That's like a foundational piece. And so before we're in labor, we take these moms through a process where they can hunt for, in the safety of our vehicle, all the birth tigers. So we go on this safari and we look for all of them. And you name them. This birth tiger is about pooping in labor. This birth tiger is about the fear of the baby not breathing. This birth tiger is the fear my husband won't show up for me, and so on and so forth. And then we go through this process saying, does this tiger need to just be free? It's not really a fear. Does this tiger need to be caged? It's actually a really big fear, and we need to build bars around it not happening. Or is this birth tiger actually really a kitty cat, and we can befriend and tame this tiger? Right? It's a part of all labor. Like pooping in labor is a kitty cat. It's going to happen. It rubs up against you. It's a part of your life. And it's really not as scary as you're making it out to be. And I think that using this like actual method to conquer something that's sort of ethereal and not really describable, to really have a method to get through to that. Like, it sounds like you're doing the same thing in different language. It's really powerful. And it's palpable for these mothers. I do art around it, and I do this whole exploration process around it. And it's really palpable, the relief that comes from seeing them for what they are. And the few tigers that really need to be caged, like, they are really dangerous. we can spend our time on that. We can say, okay, so you did have these abnormal pregnancy tests. You do have this increased risk. What are all the things that we're doing to reduce that from happening? And then the final stage of this birth tiger safari is imagining that thing that you're worrying about actually happens. And then what resources are you going to call on? Then who will you lead on to help you? How will you get through even that? And that's that adversity training that we started talking about, which I think is so powerful.
Exactly. It sounds very similar to how I work as well. Yeah. Very, but I didn't know about the safari. I don't use safari as a word, obviously, but I didn't know about this technique. It's funny. But that's the thing though, isn't like we have the knowledge about how we need to do, to prepare. I think this is a key thing that I wish was more commonly known, because a lot of, as you know, like a lot of women will probably come in the third trimester and want to do a childbirth education course, and maybe they do the hospital one, which is very, very basic. I don't know if you have that in the States, but both in Australia and Sweden.
We call it patient training.
Oh my God, how horrible. It makes you into a patient. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
That's the what. It's basically how to be a good patient.
Yeah,
it's not birth training.
It's not. And it's like, it's the same in Australia and in Sweden, that, it's basically like just a little bit about labor and birth process, and then about like the epidural and the different drugs and the different interventions that can happen and all that. So yeah, I really encourage all women to always take an independent birth class, whatever that looks like for you. If you want it in person, online, whatever it looks like, but do it.
Something where the person teaching it is not employed by the institution you're birthing at.
Very important.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I agree. I think that's so important. And I think it makes such a huge difference in outcomes. Let's switch gears now, because you have a very unique situation of having kind of in-depth knowledge of several countries. And I would like to sort of pose it a question and have you answer it based on your experience. My sense of being an international midwife and traveling and working in different environments, my sense is that Western countries especially do not have enough midwives to meet the needs and the demands.
Yes.
And that the ones that they do have are becoming increasingly more academicized, increasingly more focused on dotting I's and crossing T's, and actually spending more time conducting studies, writing papers, or involved in some kind of the academic side of midwifery. And there are fewer and fewer midwives who are actually in the trenches, doing the work, learning by experience. Is that your sense as well?
Well, both, like, yes, definitely. And I do see the value in that, because I see how when midwives do that, the profession, because we live in that masculine, hierarchical, old school paradigm still, in a sense, it's shifting, but it's still there. So all the things that we know help women by experience and anecdotal evidence is not taken seriously. And we're living in a world where everyone almost goes to hospital, where everything's supposed to be evidence-based, right? So even though we know things, the obvious things, just because they're obvious doesn't seem to make it happen in the hospital. The opposite is happening, isn't it? Generally. And so I do think there's a place for that. And I think it's really important that there are women midwives who choose to do the studies for the benefit of all and for the profession. What I do agree with very much, though, is that, oh my God, it's terrible here in Sweden. I'll tell you about it in a minute. But, most of my time I've spent as a midwife in Australia, obviously. So I know that much deeper. I didn't become a midwife in Sweden, so I don't know it as deep, even though I'm from Sweden. And now this past year, I've definitely come to understand the catastrophic situation in Sweden. However, in Australia, there's definitely, my training was a direct entry midwifery training, 3 years at uni. That's fairly new. I think it's only been when I started, maybe going on for maybe 10 years or something. So it's fairly new. Before that, it's what it's like in Sweden, which is you first become a nurse and then you specialize to become a midwife, right? And that's still how it is in Sweden. But in many other countries, it's changed or has always been different options. In Australia, you can go direct entry, and I did. And what you learn at uni is like to be super woman-centered, holistic. You get the romanticized picture of midwifery, walking alongside a woman. We get the history. We understand the midwife witch burning. We understand how obstetric took over. You get outraged as a student of how it looks, but then you're hit with a big fat slap in your face when you do go out to practice, because it's still there. It's not what they teach you. And so you come out equipped with the most latest evidence. Continuity of care and midwifery care is the best care that gives the best outcomes. But you go out there, and especially in Australia, even though generally midwives care for you, the obstetricians rule. And there's a big practice of privately practicing obstetricians as well, and that still want to demonize midwives and home birth and birth center birth, and that makes it out that birth is dangerous and they need to save all women. And the system, when you get out there, you don't get to be the autonomous midwife, and you're not trained in Australia. So I thought you were, because New Zealand, very close by, is very amazing. Like you go there, the direct midwifery entry is you become an autonomous midwife. You can be a home birth midwife instantaneously after. You get all the prescribing rights. You get to really learn how to suture. We got to learn how to suture on meat, and then I did do some in my mentorship, but not enough for me to feel confident as just to go out and be independent. I needed more practice. And then so the system is set up for you to go straight into hospital, get scared shitless of normal birth because you don't see it a lot in the hospital, and just become an obstetric nurse. So it's really heartbreaking. And this is how I've heard women in Sweden, midwives students in Sweden, say the same, because I guess here you would have the same kind of training where you really get to know the best care, which is woman-centered, holistic, midwifery led. But then you get out to the hospital and you can't practice evidence-based care anymore. You can't practice the way that you were taught, because unfortunately it takes 30 fucking years, excuse my language. I mean, that was my experience from the get-go, both as a student and having to work, because in Australia you have to work for at least, I think, 3 years in the hospital system full-time before you're allowed, right, to be a home birth midwife and have insurance for that. So you're not allowed before 3 years. And then you have to do continued courses because you weren't fully trained to be independent. You were trained to be a obstetric nurse, really, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean,
when I was there, I was actually really shocked. I got hired by a group of hospital midwives to teach them suturing. And I was like, how can you be practicing in a hospital and not know how to suture? Apparently the endorsement comes after you get licensed, and you have to learn on the job, is what they were telling me. And then pass these extra tests. That seems really scary to me. And also, not having phlebotomy skills, not having cannulation and IV skills, those are kind of core and central to delivering safe care, especially out of a hospital. So that seems shocking to me.
I know, but it's the way they control you, because it's still the system that wants to control the midwives, because you're a woman mostly. I mean, there's men that are amazing, but it's a woman's profession, and the obstetricians generally still are male, even though there's a lot of females. But it's that hierarchy. It's so yes, when you go into I did get taught the rest of the skills. It was just the suturing I didn't have. But yes, you're supposed to, your first year out, it's your first, that's, you're still kind of a student. You looked at, however, I went straight out working mostly by myself because I went to rural, so I was left by myself probably the third day, and then since then I was so I very much learned on the job very quickly. However, this is how you control the midwifery profession and keep women down,
is to withhold the critical skills. You withhold the critical skills and then say, I don't know why they're not safe to practice. Same thing's happening in the US. I mean, I think it's very hard to understand the US, but if I could sum it up, it's basically there are 5 different provider types, all under the heading of midwifery. there are 50 different states. And so, 5 times 50 is the number of laws that are out there. So it is incredibly hard to understand, but it is very similar. There are little tiny pockets in the US where there's a certain provider type has like figured it out with their legislature, and they have some protected laws, but mostly it's very much the same way, that there are restrictions to practice. There are hoops to jump through to get, life-saving meds. There are oversight required, collaborative agreements required. Like there's all of these thresholds and gatekeeping at the knowledge, right? We have this hoarding of knowledge. And this is happening from obstetrics to midwifery, and then within midwifery, from nurse midwifery to midwives, and then within that, every other type of midwife is kind of isolated in these silos, and there's very little communication between the two, and there's very little collaboration, and there's a lot of ostracization and marginalization and criminalization of the practice of midwifery all over the United States, and it's quite disturbing. The world, for sure, but I think we have such a diverse population, such a diverse licensing law making process, that it's particularly evident in the US about how these silos of information, this hoarding of information is happening kind of everywhere. And it's really disturbing. It's really disturbing. I think, like you said, going back to the sort of the elemental history of being targeted for centuries, it does leave its mark, and it's a subconscious influence over the process.
Definitely. And I think as women, we carry that in our DNA. Like we know that it's been unsafe for thousands of years to be woman. Like we just carry that, whether you're conscious of that or not. Like that does inform how we show up in the world, and it's still very structural in our world. But midwives were the first ones to burn. We were the wise ones, right? Because midwives were the women who still had power over something, which was birth, and we were revered in the community because we would go to houses and assist families, right? And we had knowledge about the herbs and just how women worked, like how the magic of women, like the power, because it's a fucking power. And that's what I do feel that we're reclaiming right now, even though the turbulence is happening, and it's an even worse crackdown on midwifery all over the world. And I'll share a bit about that. Like definitely in Australia, you see it as, only training you to become an obstetric nurse. And then really, as you go into hospital, if you have the desire to be not in the hospital, even though you have to go through at least those first 3 years full time, that leaves a mark. Like it does scare you because you only see complication, you only see medicalization of birth. I was lucky somehow. I also, maybe also how I facilitated birth. I did see a lot of physiological birth, and my whole training, I saw mostly physiological birth, both at home and in the birth center. So I had that foundation to stand on. But it's so easily, especially as a young midwife, to become super scared and just think, oh God, thank God that the doctor's here, and all those things. So I think it's a system that's setting you up not to go out to home birth and birth center births. In Australia, there are birth centers. There's actually quite a lot of them, and there is now publicly funded home birth as well with a lot of hospitals. So things are happening. There's a big movement definitely happening in Australia. And there are some really good midwives that are academics that have done really important work, right? So like
Hannah
Rachel
Dolan,
Reid, right?
Hannah
Dolan, Rachel Reid.
Yep.
And others. And so those are really important.
Victoria. I'm thinking of a bunch of them. It is very important. But I think when the midwives who are so convicted of this tradition, that they go back to school, they go back and get PhDs and master's degrees and work on the academicization piece, we lose them from daily practice.
That's true.
And there aren't very many coming to replace them. And I think this is the real crisis. Like we don't have enough midwives. And the midwives that are being trained in a medical model. So how do we break out of that? I mean, the same is happening here in India, where I live. There's a huge push to create more midwives, but they are nurse midwives, and they are midwives in name only. They are handmaidens to the obstetric system. They don't practice independently, autonomously. They have very little scope, really. And they're very isolated. There's like some that practice very rurally, like was your experience. Like, good luck, there's no one else here, so good luck. and then any of them that practice in big hospitals are just obstetric nursing skill.
100%.
And how do, like, that's what I'm here is trying to place hold, trying to carve out a space where traditional with women midwifery can bloom again, where we can have this experience of individualized, compassionate, evidence-informed care. And how do we do that? I think that's the question I'm questioning and trying to answer. It sounds like it's the same question you're trying to answer. And it's a global question. But I think never more salient than in the Western countries, who are in real risk of losing traditional midwifery. Like, they're really at risk of losing.
100%. So this gets me to what's happening in Sweden right now, right? So
please tell me. Yeah.
So I didn't really know how bad it was in Sweden until I got back, and obviously got in touch with both doulas and midwives and home birth midwives, and just started to dip my toe into the system here, right? And so Sweden is in a massive crisis, just like you said, and it's multi-layered. Why? I mean, for years and years, midwives have been speaking of how we're so understaffed, right? That's definitely not something new, but it's getting worse and worse each year. During the years, but especially during the summer months, like there is a massive crisis that midwives are not actually being able to take a full, because in Sweden we get actually like 4 weeks leave during the summer a lot of the times, or 3, or like you get a few weeks after each other. Like that's really important. It's something that we just happens in Sweden because of the unions early in the 1900s that like really fought for workers' rights. And so we get our 5 weeks a year minimum kind of off. A lot of them are taken during the summer, maybe 3 or 4 at least. And it's been like a constant thing that midwives are not able to do that because they're so understaffed. So they get called in and forced to work because it's so understaffed. And as we know, midwives are these beautiful beings that we have such a big conscience that we can't just like, oh, fuck you guys, I'm going to have my vacation. No, because oh no, my colleagues are struggling, I have to help them. And then also what's happening is this silent culture. And I know I've done that. I definitely, and I'm just now starting to stop because I'm so fucking outraged. But we have this silence culture because we also want to protect women and families. We don't want to scare women that if they get into hospital or into the birth center, maybe there won't be enough midwives for you. Maybe it's going to be really unsafe care. And it's fucking unsafe care happening across the globe, but especially in Sweden. It's so much unsafe care because it's chronically understaffed. Chronically, women or midwives might be in labor caring for multiple women in labor, running between so in Sweden midwives are more skilled than in Australia. I know, maybe more skilled than most countries. They're very much medicalized in that sense, but they can do a lot that the doctors do in other countries, right? So they have that role. So they have actually a nurse underneath them that will be more of the carer. And so midwives in Sweden don't get to be midwives a lot of the times. They get to just like manage medical situations. And so they're running between women. And in Sweden, they're doing a lot of unevidence-based care, which I was shocked about because Sweden is known for like being so good at, progressive, but not in midwifery. Unfortunately, it's very backwards state, very extremely. I'm like shocked how backwards it is and how slow to catch up they are. And midwives here are really frustrated about it too, and have been fighting so hard. I've been out demonstrating the last year. Like there's a huge movement right now happening, and things are slowly shifting, and I'll get to that, but it's come to the brink of like almost collapsing. And it is, I think, this summer really collapsing at the moment, because there's no more midwives that have skills left, because they've walked out this year. They've literally walked out. Like hospitals have lost maybe a third, maybe more of their midwives, and it's all the old ones, all the experienced ones with 10, 15, 20, 30 years of experience. They're walking out because they're like, this system is fucked. We are not being midwives. We're currently doing unsafe care. They've demanded change. It has not come. And so they've walked out. So many women midwives have stepped out. Most, I would say, midwives that are trained now, new midwives, do not go into the birth center, or I mean, there's no birth centers in Sweden, sorry. Don't go into the birth suites in hospitals because they're scared shitless of being left alone. And they are. I mean, I was left alone in Australia, in the rural hospital for sure as a new midwife, but that's not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to have mentors and older midwives showing you the way and helping you, and they're not getting that here, so they don't dare to. It used to be about a third that would go out into the hospital and into the birth suite. Now it's even less. And now when everyone knows the shit show that's going on, midwives less are wanting to be midwives as well, so they're losing students. It's just a very negative spiral that's happening. It's very scary.
And the same thing is happening in UK with the NIH, and the same thing is happening in Germany, and the same thing is happening in Italy. And we have a crisis. We have a crisis. We desperately need more midwives. I don't know the statistics in Europe, but in the United States, 50% of all of the counties, of the municipalities, are without any obstetric services. Not midwives, no obstetrics.
Holy shit.
50% of the counties in the United States have no obstetrical services. We are hundreds of thousands of providers short to meet the demand around the globe.
Wow.
And at the same time, the restrictions to practice, the hoops to jump through, the legislative nightmares are making it less and less interesting. The school loans are going up. The professional reputation is going down. The autonomy is going down. It's like a perfect storm.
Yes.
And, we have some kind of global leaders on this, but is it enough? Are we going to face a real crisis? I think we're kind of in it. I think it's already happening.
We're in it. And you know what? Like you said, you're posing this question, what should we do? You know what I think? Because what I didn't get to is that I got back, I saw the shit show, I saw the shit show happening. Everything in Sweden takes a really long time. It took me 3 months to start my business here. 3 months with paperwork. It's like, they don't make it easy. They don't want you to be sovereign and self-sufficient in this country. I mean, I love Sweden in many ways, but it definitely does not like you when you're not a part of the system. So they try their best not to make that happen or make it really hard for you. Anyways, so it took time for me to do that. And then I was like pondering what to do. Yeah, should I, because I'm registered in Australia as a midwife, right? So when you move countries, even though I'm Swedish, like I would have to do another year's study and go like walk into, do practice in the hospital as a student now, to be able to be a Swedish midwife. And so, it's not something I'm jumping on because I'm not like super excited to become a student, and definitely not in the shit show situation that's going on right now. And that's what became really clear. It's like, so I actually in Sweden am currently like a midwife doula. Like, so I still attend births. I worked alongside a home birth registered midwife in Sweden as a team with her in a sense, and also attended other home births with just women employing me as a midwife doula. Like they would have midwives that come as the medical profession, right? And I would be more of the space holder
support
for physiological birth. And also in the hospital. So I've had a few clients that really wanted me to be there and assist them to have a physiological birth in a hospital system that really is not set up for you to have a physiological birth. And so that's what happened this year. I kind of stepped into, and that was not a plan. That just kind of happened. I was asked by this home birth midwife that actually is from Italy. So she's very different from the Swedish midwives that are very scared of natural birth. A lot of them at home birth is still very like, God, that's so scary. You know, midwives here in Sweden are not pro that generally. There's some amazing ones, obviously, in the system that loves it, but most are scared of home birth. And so she was like, oh my God, I can't find like other midwives to work with. It's not easy. It's because there's a shortage in Sweden too. Like there's so few home birth independent midwives. And so I have a lot of knowledge about that, right? I've worked with that for years, and that's how I was trained. And I'm, you know, so and we're very similar in our way of practice. So she was just like, can't you just like, can we just work together? Like, just want some support, like. And so that's how I got into it. And then I just started working, and then, you know, the rumors spread, and I just got other gigs as a midwife doula. And that's how that happened. And I love it. Of course, I do miss being like the primary midwife, walking alongside women beforehand, and like being that one that's, anyways, it is a difference in being a doula. It'll never be the same as like the midwife. It's not the same, but so now I got off track here. What I wanted to say was, you said like what to do. You know what? We cannot change a broken system. I've really like that has really landed for me in the last few years, like both being in the system and realizing like I'm just traumatizing myself here. I need to get the fuck out. Because, you know, I definitely got PTSD from working in the system and having to be a part of trauma that I knew was happening to women that is not necessary and was wrong. You know, to have that knowledge really hurts my heart. It's just something that I just couldn't be a part of anymore. We can't change this broken system. It's like Titanic. It has hit the iceberg. It's sinking. You know what? When midwifery started to get regulated, I think that's when we went downhill. And because it's regulated by someone who's not a midwife, it's regulated by white men of privileged power, has no idea about women or birth or anything. And we're supposed to get the tick of approval from them that we are, you know, safe practitioners. No, we need to claim it back. And I think that this is what's happening around the world right now. It's like, it is a very turbulent time. And I think we're going to see a few years of really turbulence and scary things where the old paradigm truly is trying to like clench on to the power and like oppress and control. But we're also seeing the opposite happen, because in that, you know, pressure cooker, that's where some of us will step out of the system, and it's already happening. And we're going, fuck the system. We're just going to create a new on the sideline. And that means potentially, you know, breaking laws. Like I'm actually open for that, because right now I feel like civil disobedience needs to happen someplace in this world where it comes to midwifery, because we're traumatizing women and families and children on a, you know, daily basis in what's being created so far. We need to like totally just leave that system and come back to the roots of being with woman, putting the woman at the center and going like, you are the expert. I will assist you and hold space for you as you do what you are designed to do. And I also know some life-saving skills that will help you if that doesn't work out. But we know that if we facilitate a space where women feel safe and she trusts her body, most of them will birth beautifully, safely, without needing anything.
Yep. Or the things that they do need will be introduced in such a way that's humanistic and patient-centered, so that they say, yes, actually, I do want that intervention. I can see how that could help me. They make their own choices with information, with support, so that it's actually never traumatic in the first place. I mean, like, this is a thing. I work in a really hybrid environment now with nurses and doctors and midwives and in a hospital. And but we practice in the midwifery model of care. And so I'm a part of quite a few inductions, labor management that needs all manner of pharmaceuticals because of high-risk situations. And those women are not traumatized. They're not traumatized, even though they didn't get the normal physiologic birth they were hoping for. Their body, their health history, their baby's position, whatever, didn't allow it. They aren't traumatized because the information was brought to them. They were centered in the decision making. They were still held as the sovereign decision makers over their process, because we say, we're just here to support and advise you. We're not going to do it for you. We're not going to make choices for you. You have to live with the outcome of your choices. This is your body, your birth, your baby. What would you like to do? Here's what I'm concerned about. Here's what's happened before. Here's what the evidence says. Here's what's going on. What do you want to do? And I think when we make the birthing person the center of the work, the center of the conversation, the center of the work, everything changes. Everything changes. 100%. And of course, then, true informed decision making with the option of consent and refusal, and then that humanistic touch that we're so good at of touching kindly with respect and permission. I think that changes everything. But breaking, like, I want to challenge you on this, because part of me, my heart is singing when you say these things, like, yes, down with the patriarchy, yeah. Like, part of me is really singing. And then part of me is really scared. And I want to sort of name that fear, because I think it's a universal fear. I'm really scared for the midwives who choose to be on the front line of this fight.
Yes.
Because they will be taken out.
Yes, I know.
And I don't fault them. Those, I've always maintained, those midwives who choose to break the laws, to push the boundaries, to hold the space where no one else is holding it. Those midwives are maybe the ones that will save us from our crisis that we're in. I mean, it's not even a crisis, it's a disaster, but they will take the brunt. They will lose the battle from the dominant paradigm trying to hold on to power. And I'm just terrified for them and their families. And I am terrified for the families they serve. And I'm just really afraid about what this shakeup looks like. And we've gone really far into the nitty-gritty of like what the revolution looks like. But I'm really afraid that if the only people willing to take that risk and be on the front lines of this fight are, and I really say this with respect, but real credulousness, if the only people willing to do that are the people that don't understand the risk they're taking or don't understand the profession in general, we are doomed.
I feel like we are doomed in the system we're in, because
we're doomed in the system we're in, 100%.
I'll answer your question, but I also, after that, really want to talk to you about induction, because there's an epidemic there, and you said because you're a part of that, and
there's an epidemic of inductions.
There's
for sure.
I mean, that's just another whole kettle of fish. But when I say this, and I don't say it lightly, because I'm scared of being the burnt witch, because I have been. I feel I am one of those people that, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I just can't keep my mouth shut, and I can't see injustice, and I can't not do. So I'm one of those few percentage of the population that like acts before I think. So if someone, like, say someone falls in front of, on the train tracks, I would be the one jumping down to save that person, and everyone would be looking. I'm that crazy person that puts myself into danger. And we are a few people in the world that are like that by nature. It's just how we were born. I don't desire to be that person. I just happen to be that person. And so I get myself into trouble a lot. I was never a popular midwife amongst the other midwives or the doctors, because I would say, this woman is declining this. Why is she declining this? Because I told her the options. There wasn't just one, right? And so I wouldn't be the popular midwife, because I wouldn't toe the line. And because I had a conscience that told me I had to be woman-centered and I had to be just. And this is I'm not doing this on myself. It's like, we need these people like me. Unfortunately, I am one of them. I wish I wasn't. That dare to be burnt, because that's how women got their right of votes, right? Back in the day, which is not long ago, unfortunately. Like, that's how anything is changing, is because we have people that can't stand to live knowing they don't do something about the injustices that they are seeing.
I agree.
And
I agree.
what I'm
100%.
seeing right now is this horrible system that is traumatizing women that I was a part of because I needed to for my training, but I got the hell out of it when I could, because and I know there's some amazing women out there that are already, there's so many midwives who are leaving the system, but they're not leaving birthing. And they are working.
That's exciting. That's exciting. And this goes back to the point I was making. Like, I agree with you. The system as it is broken beyond repair because it's based on a power over patriarchal system that devalues women as simply vessels. It is a broken system, full stop. I agree with you 100%. But here's my problem. Here's my question, concern. The ones who get it, and I think you and I get it. I think many of our listeners get it. I think many of those really well-meaning academicized midwives in the system who are using the system to prove the validity of the skills of midwifery get it. I think lots of people get it. Like, Hannah Dahlen's seminal work, The Canary in the Coal Mine, people get it. The problem is, and this is exactly what you're talking about, the bravery, the courage, the risk that it takes to be the one that speaks up is so great in this current polarized culture that the globe is experiencing this polarization. Yeah. It's so risky that I think only a few are speaking up. Yeah. And those few are not big enough numbers yet to turn the tide. And those few are in grave danger. And honestly, Anna, I don't think this is you, but I'm just saying, having my finger on the pulse globally, there are many who are speaking up, but are not trained, are not fully skilled, do not understand what they're doing. Yes. And in the US, we have a category of birth workers now called birth keepers, which is these doula plus kind of folks. They're advertising as birth keepers, as birth attendants. They don't have any formal training, which is not necessary. Like I was fully apprenticeship trained. I don't believe necessarily that you have to be in uni to learn everything. I think being outside the system is very important. Very important. But they're learning uninitiated. They're learning with half-baked information. Yeah. And they don't even know the risk that they're taking. Yeah. And we have a number of fetal demises and maternal demises linked to these birth outcomes. And statistically, it's being shown in Oregon and Australia, and we're seeing it in many other various places where they're not taking statistics, where we have a trackable, statistical bad outcomes for these partially trained people who have good hearts. I know they have good hearts. Nobody's trying to hurt anyone, but they don't have all of the knowledge to actually be safe providers. And or they do have this sort of harebrained craziness that you and I both have to like go out there and be in harm's way. And what it does is it sets the whole thing up for disaster. Because not only does that one family have a poor outcome, but the profession in general has another poor outcome associated with it. So we have less credibility and less traction to be the change that we want to see. So like my question is twofold. Like certainly, how do we bring down the system? But how do we keep midwifery what it is? How do we stay true to safe care? Balancing the use of evidence, technology was invented to save lives. Like cesareans absolutely save lives. 100%. I'm alive because of a cesarean. I have helped many babies arrive here, through getting them a cesarean, like cesareans save lives. And yet Amnesty International is calling the US cesarean rate a human rights epidemic because it's actually causing death now, right? The rate is so high, it's causing it. So it's about the balance. We don't want to vilify any particular provider type or any particular intervention. It's about finding the balance. And so the balance, I think, is is the elusive part. It's the part the obstetric world does not have. Medicine does not have balance. And unfortunately, it's the part that the half partially initiated birth keepers also don't have. They don't have balance. It's like the pendulum swinging at both ends, and we need to find the middle way, that place in the center where the 3 to 5% of people who really do need help can get it. And the people that don't get it. Like, that's the question. And how do we bring that about? And I know you might not have an answer. That's my big question.
I hear you, and I agree. I do know what you speak of. And that does not sit well with me either. There's, I love doulas, and there should be a doula for each woman in a hospital. I believe that 100%. Should definitely be,
100%.
a birth attendant that can hold that spiritual, emotional, mental, cultural, all of that beautiful space. But some of them are really radical in disregarding that women could need help. And
yes,
that, birth is not innately safe. No. It has never been innately safe. Most women will have a safe physiological birth if all is protected and held for her. Most. But as you said, like there's a few, I would say at least 10% in nature, maybe more now, because we have more complications, just how our lifestyle, right?
More toxins in the water, less nutrient availability, more.
So probably more today, maybe say 15, whatever. But I would say most wouldn't need it if, body, mind, and soul was prepared for birth in the right way, like we talked about. Like, the preparation is key here. However, I can see, like, on Instagram, some of them are really kind of getting momentum. And I do feel sad. It makes me sad. I saw someone posting the other day, and I really like her, which made me sad. Like, just really bashing midwives being too close to the baby when it was born, like touching the baby. And I'm like, oh my God, you don't know the relationship between that mother and that midwife. They might have the most caring, loving friendship. And she's like holding space in that way. And in that moment, maybe that was like what they both wanted. Who knows? Like, it was just it's so sad when they are bashing midwives, because true midwives walk with women, and we're so woman-centered, and we love women and families and babies, and we do everything to hold that beautiful space just like they do in their way. And also when I see like them posting things that essentially says that nothing is ever valid, like no intervention, we know that there's definitely times where it's valid. A lot of the times it's not. And that's the problem, that it's just over medicalized. That doesn't mean we don't need it. And I think it's amazing that we have all this amazing knowledge, and we should have that for women readily available, but they don't all need it. And that's where the crux is, right?
Yeah. But how do we find that balance? How do we bring that balance into our lives, into our practice, into the culture, into the larger consciousness of what birth is and what it needs? I think that's definitely my life mission. And it sounds like, what we're all trying to find in our own ways, through studies, through empirical practice, through communication. Like, we're all trying to find balance. And I define, balance in many ways. But to me, it comes together where safety is the bottom line. And I think who defines safety is the next question. And I would say the birthing person always is who defines safety for them. And I think to define safety for themselves, they have to have all the information. And so, one of the most rudimentary ways that I think any of us can be the revolution is to continue to spread information, continue to share what it is, what it looks like, what it's all about. Because and center that birthing person's information gathering, making sure it's not one-sided, right? Because choice is only possible if there is options. And so we have to keep providing those options. I think that's the most rudimentary way that we can support. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, what's happening in Sweden right now is that, I don't even know where it's happening, but there's definitely uproar, both amongst the, women in general knowing about what's going on. I mean, usually they're pregnant or have had babies that knows about it. But then like amongst midwives, we've been out demonstrating, and what's happening is that there is a movement towards continuity of care finally. There is a movement towards one midwife with one laboring woman finally. I mean, it's not able to happen because now a lot of midwives have walked out and not many midwives want to be midwives anymore. So unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of nurses without even having midwifery training have to pop into the birth suites because there's no midwives. So that's currently the state, but it's moving towards continuity of care. They're moving towards having one midwife for one laboring woman. But simultaneously, just a few years ago, they closed the only birth center in Sweden, not because it was failing. It has the best records, the best outcomes, the best, women love it, raving about it. It wasn't just making enough money, because money is not made. And this is where the crux is. You can't make money off normal physiological birth.
There's the problem. Yep.
So everything in Sweden, this is why also there's not birth centers or a lot of home birth midwives, because in Sweden, it's thought that you have to have a NICU where you birth. So you can't just have a small little birth center somewhere. People have to travel for sometimes hours up north, where it's really rural, hours to get to a hospital to birth. So a lot of them birth in the freaking car on the way, because that's safer than just having a home birth midwife or having a birth center close by, because there's no NICU.
Oh my gosh, we could go on for hours. It's just like it's like one problem begets the next. We're just in this cycle of crazy. Well, yeah. All of these are such important points. Tell the truth, everyone. Tell the truth. Tell what birth is like, and share the choices, the options. The other thing is like, how do we get the payer sources? Like, how do we get profit out of maternity care? Like that, it's going to be, we'll know the system has changed when that happens, right? Because right now in the entire world, the cesarean is the most commonly performed operation.
Yeah, because that's where the money
right
is.
Now in the entire world, the NICU makes the most money for the hospital. So this is, how do we get profit off of people's bodies? That's the number one question, I think.
I guess that's where it happens. That's why I say we can't change the system, right? We need to do it outside, because we need to take back the feminine values of like care, just valuing woman, valuing the softer qualities in society that has been shunned and looked at as weak. It's not fucking weak. It's strong to be fucking kind and care about people. The soft values are what actually makes this world a livable place, and it's becoming unlivable for most of us, right? So what needs to happen is just a total shift where we value the softness and the kindness and the care and the slowness and all of these things that are not valued because it doesn't make money. When that happens, it will change. And I think we just need to start valuing it. And it's what you said, if there's anything that anyone should take away from our conversation, is that we need to stop with the cancel culture of ourselves and dare to speak up. Because I do it myself with the women I care for. Sometimes I silence myself, a censor, going, I don't want to tell her how bad it is in that hospital, because then when she goes in, maybe I put something in her head that makes her, because we know the importance of safety in birthing. And so we cancel ourselves and censor. I don't want to tell her how bad it is right now outside the door where everyone's like doing chaos. I want her to feel safe in her room when she's birthing. But that's also doing women of this favor, because we're treating her like a child that the system is treating her, as well.
Yes.
So we're just perpetuating this horrible.
The truth.
Tell the
truth.
We're big girls. We're big girls. We can handle it. And then we can make an informed choice going, okay, I'm choosing not to birth in that scary hospital that actually has understaffed midwives and they're working on their knees.
Information. What is the cesarean rate? What is the breastfeeding rate? What is the epidural rate of all the hospitals you're considering, right? What is the rate for that midwife of transfers? What is her cesarean rate? What is her outcome rate? Like, how far are you from the hospital? How often do emergencies happen? What does the NIH say? What does the National Institutes for Health say? Like, keep asking these questions. Find the information, share the information, tell the truth. We're big girls. We can handle it. I love that. Yep.
Yeah, that needs to happen amongst midwives, like that we dare to show up on social media and say, like, yes, this is how fucked the system is. You can choose to go into this system, but you need protection. Bring a freaking doula or someone to support you if you go into that system.
Amen.
That knows intervention and knows the pros and cons. So if your doctor or midwife don't tell you the pros and cons, she can.
Yeah. We need truth tellers. Well, Anna, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining me on this conversation, on this call. I hope that we get to circle with you in Midwifery Wisdom more often, because we love your voice and your experience and your wealth of knowledge. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Till next time, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.